My first visit was in Shetland in 2012 when I came as an artist in residence up to Yale, to the Global Yale Weave Studio. Coming from a big city, it's immediately touched me, the landscape and the whole space. I was very glad when I get the opportunity to come here years later as a lecturer. I started my textile creativity, I would say, at an early age, like 14. When I was 14, I studied in an art specialist high school. So I learned there lots of textile technique, the basics, and then later on at the university I specialized on weaving. So coming here to Shetland, what really excited me and inspired me, you know, your sheeps around you, and then you see the crofters and you see the lambing and you see how they get to the wool brokers and processed, and you can go to buy the beautiful yarns from them. So it's even just the selection, and also for myself, I can do the same myself in a smaller scale, go through these processes. It's really the hands-on, not something you, like, for example, in industry experience, you just get something from the delivery. Coming to Shetland, I have learned a lot about its knitting history, but as a weaver I was amazed to discover that actually Shetland used to have a strong tweed industry, which was run by the Edina family in Vaughan. They stopped the production at the 90s, so the collection is at the moment in the Shetland Museum and Archives. I was able to go there and look through some of their samples. These represent Shetland's tweed history and the development, and looking them was a great inspiration for me. By the help of Carol Christensen, I looked through a fragment of it. It's quite a lot to look at. So inspired by the pieces I've seen in the museum and archives, I was inspired to create my own tweed pieces. My aim was not to definitely reproduce them, but with a contemporary approach to create a new way of tweed. The Shetland tweed represents very well the Shetland natural colors with some added colors, and they used the basic weave structures, and that's fascinating. By this relatively simple structures you can create lots of amazing fabrics. These samples made only by the local Shetland wool, so I'm using the wool brokers or the Jameson of Shetland wools for these samples. Sometimes I like to go a bit like playful, so this has some hand-dyed yarn as a weft, or some color popping up, a little bit more colorful but still keeping the natural look. Or a little bit with a border, a combination of two different patterns. So again, it's amazing how a simple structure can result a very rich fabric and also the soft wool. These other samples are taken further or a little bit of variations of the stripe or the herringbone. This work later on led me to another project, which is again based on the basic tweed structures, but also I used my inspiration from the landscape around in Shetland. This project was supported by the Shetland Arts and Creative Scotland and the Shetland Island. So I was glad to be able to create this collection. I would say I call it like a landscape collection. As you can see, I used the colors of the landscape, and also I am very interested in besides the colors, the textures around us, either the dry walls or the land or the sea, or as they work together. So I created some samples based on these colors. I used for these again the Jameson of Shetland wools and some parts from the wool brokers. And what is also interesting, I dyed some pieces has dyed both the warp and the weft, some only just the weft, but basically that's something I try to work on to create my own color palette. So these are some bigger pieces. You can see I tried the transition of the colors of the landscape. Also the structure you can see. This is also a quite basic structure, but with this a bit textured, more textured and three-dimensionality makes it more like tactile. Some cases I used like a minimum of lycra to give this texture and this a bit of three-dimensional surface, and also I added a hidden dark blue kind of like as the land and the sea and the sky connected. Also the white, the weft white is a bit of mohair, giving again more texture with the hairiness slightly, but again not too much. My other piece again more for the land with the hand dyed warp. So that's all myself. It's very important for me, like I can include into the making process lots of techniques, and basically to create your own yarn is quite a amazing part of the process. I have also a piece which is I really like. It was based on the more like the peat colors, and it has both side has a different effect. One is this more like the textured and pattern, but the other one is not definitely plain, but with this little dotty elements. I made this shawl inspired by the dry walls around us and the lichen colors, and I try to reflect the texture of the rocks. So that's what I find very interesting and playful to work with. Some yarns actually hand-dyed and recycled yarn. So it helps to give a further push of the texture. And I try to represent the sea by this kind of stripy piece. Actually, the archive has a very similar sample, but this gradient stripe rhythm, I thought it represents the waves. I am not an artist who focusing on one thing. I am so curious about how materials and techniques work, so I have always lots of projects going on, and I'm working on like 10 different things on the same time, so always something on my looms and experimenting with other techniques. So I can show to you what I have on my bigger table loom at the moment. I have this 16 shaft table loom, which is very good for experimenting and sampling. This piece is more about figuring out a structure. If you are a weaver, you are aware of that. If you have lots of shafts, lots of harnesses, you are able to create more complex structures. So this 16 shaft is quite a nice number to use, and I am not using all of them all the times, because also I believe like just a simple structure can give you nice results, but sometimes just good to try some more complex things. On the loom at the moment, this is a more, I would say, graphic design. So I am just using natural colors for it. The warp is from Jamieson of Shetland, and the weft is from the wool brokers. If you are a weaver, I'm sure you agree with me, like weaving is a very small process. You are working slowly from the very beginning. So even the preparation stage is a long and thought through process, and then the actual weaving also quite therapeutic repetition, but that gives for the whole experience a very, very nice process. And when you are working on the loom and weaving, you have time to think a lot, you have time to meditate, not just on the design what you are working on, but lots of other things as well. And for my experience, I am always just like designing further the next patterns. So when I am doing this and then I'm just growing with the pattern, I designed in my head already another 5 designs. So that's the process itself also gives you kind of like the new ideas and new inspirations. So basically the pattern is coming out by these yarn floatings, and as you can see, I tried here a more like a grayish effect, blending the different color weft, and then here I am just looking with only the black. Also I would mention here a very important element of the whole design process, because on the loom you still can feel this fabric quite raw and flat, but after the finishing, so when when you cut off from the loom and you wash it, then lots of changing happening with the fabric. So that I really like with the wool this factor, how you finish, how you wash it, and then basically a very different material come to life. So I can show to you just a little bit how it works. If you are a weaver, you know we are dealing with some shafts, harnesses, and then operating, lifting up and down. Basically the combination of the lifting creates the pattern. So as I said, I am using now 16. I need to watch it quite focused, more than like a 4-shaft pattern, just because of the high number of the shafts and also the pattern repetition. It's not too big. If I remember right, it's 24 picks of the repetition, but I still need to focus a little bit. But yes, so that's my pattern now. So just put through my weft at the gap. So this gap we call the shed, and then as you can see I am developing the fabric line by line, what we call like pick by pick. And as you can see, it's a slow and patience required, but other hand, that's the beauty of it. The complexity of this threading and the whole structures, I am using also a weave software, so that is something helps me to imagine my pattern, and also a little bit basically make variations. So this is what I am doing now. If I want, I can change colors. I can show to you here like more a variation of it, just like a color, but it can be anything. So because this is a table loom, I am operating basically the arms up and down, so that's even more slower than to do it on different looms. So if you have a loom, what we have in the college with pegs to basically program a loom, or we have computer aided loom, basically this process can be speed up. So it's really depends on the loom you are working on, how slow or how fast you can work. So, but again, as I said, this loom for me for experimenting and create various samples, it's perfect. One of my earlier pieces I made. I used the wool brokers yarns, inserted some of my own hand spun yarn. I call this like a sunset scarf because of the color palette, and then I tried this gradient effect as I can see usually. As I can see many times just looking out of my window, and the beautiful sunset and just like the paintings on the sky, so that's also inspiring. And as I said, experimenting with the colors and the yarn making. My recent pieces, these again, I like to do some playful and experimental pieces. So kind of see these as like a picture or like a painting. So I'm not definitely always thinking about like function. So like design or craft or art is not like a separate something for me, but it all works together. In my practice, I am very interested in materials as general, but in Shetland, obviously, the main thing is the wool for me to explore and experiment with. I really found it fascinating how from the land, raw material from the wool by a very long and slow process, but a very enjoyable process you can create through yarn, spinning, dyeing. Basically you end up with the end product either by knitting or weaving or any textile technique. So this whole process is important for me, and I find it like very important to express in my work, and that's what I am working on. I basically I would like to show this whole process through my works. And the other important thing to reflect on in my work, the landscape and my environment. It can be either the natural or the man-made part of it. The wools are from the local farmers. I am very lucky being here in Shetland. At my doorstep I can get beautiful wool. These are from the Garscroft Bressay, from Chris, but other crofters also were happy to provide me. There are some still on the list, on my list to get from them. One of my other small side projects happening on this small loom, which is very old, but seen a lot, and I really like it. In spite of that, it's just a 4-shaft loom. It can make still lots of nice things, and I am really enjoying this project. It's kind of like without boundaries and then just playing. As I mentioned, I am dyeing many cases my yarn, so this one is very much connected to this because the technique, which is an ancient technique, the ikat, is based on dyeing the yarn. So the pattern or the motifs very much goes through a dyeing process, quite detailed and planned dyeing process before the weaving. So I have at the moment this pinkish, orangish coral colors I dyed recently. The warp is cochineal, and the weft is madder dyed. I dyed the yarns with this gradient effect, so that will help me to get this ikat effect. I really like it has this feathered brush stroke kind of effect, like a watercolor. So I am just like taking as it happens, not much further planned. You can create with this technique very precisely planned patterns, but again I just wanted to get this watercolor effect and then experiment with the unpredictable side of the dyed yarns. So again, here's some color experiments or dyed, naturally dyed yarns. So that's also something interesting, to dye your yarns with natural materials like plants, or in the case of cochineal with bugs. In this case, the structure not really plays a huge role. I decided just to do like a plain weave. I experimented with other techniques as well, structures, but I just decided this plain weave and the play of the transitions and these brush strokes gives a nice effect of this basically watercolor effect and like a watercolor painting. So this is the weft as well, kind of like a multi-tone dyed. So not just the weft, but the warp, not just the warp, but the weft as well, dyed. But it has kind of like a random and then a unpredictable result, what I'm looking for to see how will happen. So still some to go. So yeah, I am just regarding them like little watercolor woven paintings. So as I said, it's a four shaft loom, so I'm just lifting up the 1, 3 and 2 4 shafts to create a plain weave. So here this goes faster because you don't need to think that much, but that is exciting how the colors mixing, the warp colors and the weft colors. Because this is a smaller loom, it has like a smaller distance and the shed is smaller, so I need to forward it more times, but again for experimentation it's still very good. This technique is usually used for more like for cotton or silk, and again it's a very time-consuming process because of the dyeing, but I am using wool, so that also can be interesting. It's not definitely used for wool, but more for cotton or silk. For my work, landscape and my environment is a huge inspiration. Either the natural environment or the man-made, or how is it works together, live together. Especially last year, I walked a lot around here in Bressay and just experienced the changes of the landscape, and I found it amazing how the different seasons or the weather situations or the just immediate light changes influence basically everything. So these regular walks around here in Bressay gave me the inspiration for my latest project, which is a kind of combination of the weaving and felting, and this is still an ongoing project, so I am kind of just like the middle of it. I am using the wool, local wool. I am weaving it and then felting it. So as I mentioned, that the man-made and the natural landscape combination is very exciting for me, and especially the ruins, the abandoned croft houses, what you can see all around Shetland, and here in Bressay you can pass by all the time. I was drawn always to architecture, possibly because my mom was an architect, so wherever I am in the world I always look this connection with the nature and the environment and the man-made structures. So this is what I tried to represent with this, I would say, relief pieces. And again, I try to not exactly represent just like what it means to me, these ruins. So obviously I look closer, and the structures and the textures of these ruins and this place in the nature. So I am looking also as a composition and also the colors, and as I said, the changes whenever you walk around. The next day it looks different color, different lights. So every day I can find a different inspiration, even at the same place or the same ruins. Other pieces, yeah, I am looking different shapes, forms. So these will be like wall pieces or a series of compositions. So at the university I learned different weave techniques, tapestry, rug making, and the dobby weaving on different looms, and later on I had like industry experience, working in the industry. So I have like over 10 years experience working in manufacturing, and that is a very different way of working with lots of boundaries and expectations. And when I came here, I could go back to my more like craft and handmade way of working. So that was also something nice and very nourishing. So this is what I try to pass to my students as a lecturer. So it's important to explore your roots, your heritage and your culture.